Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Le Drian, thank you very much for the invitation from the CRPM to attend your General Assembly. It was quite natural for me to accept because, as many of you are aware, the Commission has engaged now 2 years ago in an in-depth review of the European infrastructure policy framework, the Trans-European Transport Networks, and the entire process was carried out in a rather open fashion with stakeholders. And your organization, the CRPM, played a key role, and your Transport Committee in particular, composed of the various regional committees, has been accompanying us throughout that process, and we interacted, I think, quite intensely. And the outcome of the process will now lead us in a few days' time to a Commission proposal, where I do hope that some of your representatives in this committees and in the Transport Working Group will find back some of the ideas. I don't have much time because of accessibility reasons. My plane is at 6 o'clock, so I think at some point I will be asked to go. So what I suggest is I don't speak too long because I think that the TEN-T policy is relatively well known, and I think there must be quite a number of questions. Let me just give you 4 or 5 key messages. The first one is that the European infrastructure policy is going to change very significantly out of that review process and in the proposals which the European Commission will put forward on the 19th of October, a proposal on new TEN-T guidelines on the one hand, and a proposal, an ambitious proposal for an EU budget. 32 billion euros is what the European Commission will ask for to support the effort of member states and regions to develop that European infrastructure. European infrastructure is a shared competence. In effect, the major responsibility for developing transport infrastructure is with member states and with you as regions, increasingly in all member states, and it's a shared competence with the European Union. What we have to do is to provide a framework, a policy framework, a regulatory framework, and a planning framework to ensure that what member states do when they develop European infrastructure progressively develops into a genuine European framework, so that a European infrastructure can be the basis for the internal market, can be the basis for the mobility of our citizens in the European Union. The existing TEN-T policy framework does that, or tries to do this, but out of the review process of the last 2 years, it is quite clear that there were a number of shortcomings which the new proposals will try to address. They will try firstly to ensure that infrastructure policy is part of a transport policy concept. So not building infrastructure for the sake of it, but using the existing infrastructure, using it in all modes of transport, interconnecting these modes of transport, and using it to ensure that the internal market and services in the internal market can function properly. To do that, the guidelines will propose a regulatory framework and will propose to member states to agree on a certain number of requirements which would then be applied to the TEN-T across all 27 member states. Let me give you a few examples. We will suggest that in railway, the ERTMS signaling system is deployed throughout the TEN-T to ensure real interoperability. We will propose that European ports are properly connected to the rail and land transport system of Europe. Or we will also propose that in terms of aviation, the European air traffic management system called CESAR is effectively deployed through Europe. So these requirements will be set out in our legal proposal and will provide a more specific regulatory framework to develop infrastructure in member states. These requirements will not only be for member states, because one of the other lessons of this review process is that infrastructure policy is not just national administrations. Infrastructure policy is regions also, so these requirements will also be applicable, available to guide infrastructure development in regions, and they will of course also apply to infrastructure managers, to port operators, to airports, and to those which will use this infrastructure. So quite a developed framework into a real European infrastructure policy and a real regulatory framework. What we will also do, and what is not available today, you see a blank screen, or nearly blank screen here, is maps. There will also be maps on the 19th of October, because the TEN-T policy is, of course, also about a planning framework to implement these requirements, a planning framework to guide national action and European action, and a framework also to guide regional efforts and the efforts of all those project promoters which develop infrastructure in Europe. Today, the TEN-T is essentially the interconnection of national plans. This work was done quite carefully over the 90s and for many years, and this interconnection is quite effective, but at the end of the day, the TEN-T today is essentially national plans. So out of that analysis, which also leads to the conclusion that this cannot be done entirely at European level, there's just too much priority in that framework, the Commission, Member States, the European Parliament, and yourselves suggested that we develop a European methodology to identify out of that very dense network what should be and could be the backbone of a European infrastructure network. And that's the work which was carried out on the European Core Network, which will be a second part of the TEN-T planning framework. So you will have, in our proposal, a very dense network for all modes of transport that will cover the entire European Union and would cover all regions of the European Union. That very dense network will essentially be the responsibility of member states and of regions, but within a European planning framework, with a target date to implement it, 2050, and with key requirements that will ensure that this very dense comprehensive network is developed in a European process which ensures integration and interoperability of the network throughout the continent. The European Union will also put in place a certain number of instruments to support efforts of member states and of regions on this comprehensive network. Particularly, the Cohesion Fund will be available to support investment in cohesion countries. And I think that the other instruments of regional policy should also be available, even if, of course, amounts available for that are then of a different order of magnitude. But so there will be very significant support under the Cohesion Fund. We will also make available for this very dense network the possibility to use innovative financial instruments, European Investment Bank loans, so that when you develop project financing on the basis of this TEN-T network, we can support your efforts. So that is for the very dense network, which is the one which existed so far, but which we have streamlined, which we have developed, and where again the requirement will ensure full integration. On top of that dense network, you will have the core network. So the core network is a subset of the comprehensive network, which segments were identified on the basis of a European methodology by the European Commission, discussed, of course, with member states, but on the basis of a European methodology, whereas the dense network comes bottom up from you and from member states. The purpose of that core network is very similar to the comprehensive network, so the same requirements will apply to that core network. The major difference is that this core network would need to be fully available, fully functional at the horizon 2030. So we expect that that member states, that the European Union concentrate their effort in terms of project preparation, in terms of funding, to ensure that this core network is fully functional in 2030. Comprehensive network, core network are both parts of the same TEN-T system, which should link up the entire European Union. The core network will cover the entire European Union as well. It starts from the 27 EU capitals, and its main purpose is to connect the main European seaports with these capitals and to connect the main European seaports with the main economic centers across Europe. So this new TEN-T core network will, much more than today's existing priority project, focus on the integration of seaports into the transport system, or conversely, ensure that the European transport system is planned taking fully into account the main entry and exit points which these gateway ports are for the European transport system. With that new concept, I think we also go quite a long way towards meeting the concerns of the CRPM, which were expressed in all these meetings over the last 2 years, which noted that the existing TEN-T does not cover adequately your regions and the maritime facade of Europe, and so we paid particular attention to that, also to ensure that the entry into our transport system becomes over time more balanced. To ensure that this new transport policy concept, and I will stop in a moment with that so that I can also take a question, Mr. Chairman, to help member states and regions to implement this new framework, the dense TEN-T network, the core TEN-T network, we will propose 2 new instruments, streamlined and more ambitious instruments. On the one hand, a very significant budget increase. We will propose to increase the funds available for the TEN-T from 8 billion to 32 billion, so a 4-fold increase. Disregarding, in addition, or not disregarding, but in addition to the funding available under Cohesion Fund and Regional Policy. So TEN-T funding would increase, according to the Commission proposal, up to 32 billion. Clearly, this is the beginning of the story, and we will need to convince budget ministers to keep that budget. That is going to be an interesting discussion and debate over the next 12 months. But I think that the arguments made in the Commission White Paper on Transport, that investing in transport is investing in growth, investing in transport is investing in sustainability, investing in growth is also investing in the future. I think these arguments, which are developed in the white paper quite convincingly, are starting to gain ground, including in member states and with finance ministries. I think regions are those public entities or political entities in our member states which prioritize transport most. Member states have done it less over the past decades. I think this is now beginning to turn, and I think the white paper and the debate at European level has helped with that. In addition, the new TEN-T framework, as I just described, also ensures budget ministers that the added value and leverage effect of the EU budget is magnified and made most effective. So we will propose an ambitious budget. Next to that ambitious budget, we will also propose a number of instruments to be more effective when, with you, we prepare projects. So there will be technical assistance, there will be a very strong TEN-T executive agency to help prepare projects across all 27 member states. We will also continue to do institution building to support project preparation, notably project financing. But we will also put in place a number of transport corridors on that core network. And these transport corridors are not a planning priority, they are an implementation instrument, because we hope that out of these corridors we can then also better organize the funding effort between regions, national states, and EU, so as to have a much better view and long-term vision of what funding is available across a corridor, so that projects can take that into account, and that it then also becomes easier to calibrate projects and also sometimes to find project financing for that. In addition, on these transport corridors, we very much hope that we can not only build infrastructure, but also ensure that we put in place the traffic management and the various operational measures out of which the existing infrastructure is optimized and better used. So as you can see, quite a broad picture, which will be presented in 2 proposals on the 19th of October. They bear the imprint of the work with the CRPM. I'm not saying and not necessarily expecting that the maps which go with it will be unanimously applauded, because choices had to be made in these maps. That's absolutely clear, and I expect that I will have some questions. But I think that the interaction between the comprehensive network, which covers absolutely everyone and guarantees access into the core network. And the shorter term implementation of the core network will serve not some, but all the European Union, all the regions of the European Union, so that mobility in Europe for us as citizens, but also for our goods, will be immensely improved, and its imprint in terms of environment and climate and other impacts can also be put under control. So that's the expectation of the policy. I hope I gave you a bit of a flavor. And clearly after the 19th of October, when the proposals are there, the Commission will of course be ready to continue the dialogue with the CRPM on the basis of these specific proposals. Thank you very much.